All right. Welcome, DoorGrow hackers, to the DoorGrow show. If you are a property management entrepreneur that wants to add doors, make a difference, increase revenue, help others, impact lives, and you are interested in growing your business and life, and you are open to doing things a bit differently, then you are a DoorGrow hacker. DoorGrow hackers love the opportunities, daily variety, unique challenges, and freedom that property management brings. Many in real estate think you're crazy for doing it. You think they're crazy for not, because you realize that property management is ultimate high trust gateway to real estate deals, relationships, and residual income. At DoorGrow, we are on a mission to transform property management businesses and their owners. We want to transform the industry, eliminate the BS, build awareness, change perception, expand the market, and help the best property management entrepreneurs win. I'm your host, property management growth expert Jason Hull, the founder and CEO of DoorGrow. Now, let's get into the show. And today's guest, very special guest, super excited about, head of a really cool software platform, Vinay Patankar. Welcome to the show. And he is here representing Process Street.
Thank you, Jason. Excited to be here. Hey, everyone.
So Vinay, give everybody a little bit of background. How did Process Street sort of come about? And let's start with you. What's your background in all of this?
Sure. So my background is I've done a few things. I'm from Australia originally. I kind of worked in tech and worked in finance, worked as a recruiter, started a couple of companies, and kind of ended up on running a company that was a marketing agency. We were doing lead generation for consumer finance. So basically driving leads for credit cards for Citigroup and insurance for Geico and things like that. And we basically had a very repetitive process where we were launching new campaigns on different ad networks and running a lot of different tests. So maybe we're launching 20 or 30 different tests every day. At this point in time, we're working on a lot of the new kind of ad networks where maybe they hadn't released their API yet, or essentially there wasn't much automation possible. And so a lot of that was being done manually. Had a team in India that was helping kind of manage and run a lot of those campaigns. Mm-hmm. And I basically had a lot of issues tracking all of that, delegating work, tracking that it was done, making sure that it was done correctly, getting visibility over the progress of all these tasks, which meant that I was staying up until 6 o'clock in the morning sometimes, kind of working with my team in India. And I got really frustrated. And I was like, why isn't there some software that can just like do this for me while I sleep? And so
right.
that was kind of the original pain that I was feeling. And I knew that there were workflow products in the enterprise. I had worked with tools like Microsoft SharePoint and SAP Workflow and Oracle Fusion and these very multi-million-dollar kind of expensive products. Mm-hmm. And I knew that they existed, and I kind of understood that, oh yeah, this is like you define a workflow, then it's in a very kind of controlled set of tracks, and people kind of just follow it and execute it. And this is how a lot of the really big businesses that have to manage thousands or tens of thousands of people like manage their processes.
Right.
And I'm like, why isn't there, a tool that does this but is easy to use as Gmail? And that was kind of the original spark. And I was like, I just wanted it for my own team to use. And so we built it as an internal tool initially, and got my own company on it, and then started showing it to people. And I was like, oh, this is super cool. And so we kind of eventually spun it out as its own product. And that was the beginning, but essentially just scratching my own itch.
So do you still have the agency stuff, or that's on the
No, that's long gone. Yeah.
Okay, great. So originally this was built to fill a real need in a real world situation, in a real world scenario, which a lot of times the challenge with software is that it's not. It's built on some sort of theory or idea by some nerd. And then when it comes to practical reality, it's got too many clicks. It's not super user friendly. It becomes really cumbersome and confusing, but it does everything, right? It's got all these features and bells and whistles. And so, so how, in developing this, what's sort of the philosophy behind Process Street, and how do you balance that?
Yeah, for sure. Awesome question. So that the kind of thing that you just said is exactly the problem with most of the incumbent products in our space, right? Those products I mentioned before, like SharePoint and SAP workflow and this and that, like that's their exact problem. They were designed by business process analysts, by like Six Sigma specialists, right? That come from the process engineering department in like IBM or something, right? And have gone to, business school, have done MBAs and have a very specialized understanding of how business process is supposed to work, understand how to design flow diagrams, and essentially like took what they learned in university and kind of like put it on a computer. So they just like took what they draw on a piece of paper and just like put it on a computer. And it's interesting. That's actually how a lot of first generation software was built. It's like, let's like take this thing that we do offline and let's put it on a computer, right? But the experience that you get on paper is not necessarily the best experience that you have on a computer, right? And so you actually see that in a lot of the products, right? Like the first generation products were designed that way. And our kind of approach to it was user-centric, or basically user-first. So the idea was like, we're not selling to people who have degrees in business information systems. We're selling to people that run property management companies, or people that run a local restaurant, or maybe someone that runs a hotel, or maybe someone that runs like an HR team or a sales team or something. These aren't necessarily people that they're specialized in the process department of like a kind of enterprise. And so our approach was, what is going to be the easiest piece of software that we can make for people who have no education, no understanding, don't know what a process is, don't know what a workflow is, never done any of that before in their life or ever read anything about it, that they're going to be able to intuitively understand, pick up, and just use without requiring any kind of context or previous knowledge, right? So that's the approach that we've been taking, which is really this, can my grandma figure this out kind of approach, right?
Yeah, I think when it comes to anything, if it's too complicated, maybe for an 8-year-old or for grandma to do it, then there's resistance no matter who is doing it. And if you're a high functioning, quick thinking entrepreneur, or you have a team member that English is a second language and they're overseas, I mean, regardless, like it lubricates the process to have that ease, and user experience and ease should always be at the top of the list with software. It's like my number one qualifier for looking at software. Will my team actually use it? And will it be easy for them? And how quick can they adopt it? Because adoption for software is one of the biggest challenges, period, getting a team to actually use it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, all right. So Process Street. So as you started building out Process Street and adding different features and getting this ready, what have you seen? Maybe you could explain what Process Street is for those that are listening, because it really is. It's not just a process documentation platform, which is great and awesome. But and there are platforms that just are for process documentation that are out there, which, it's like, and some people will use their Google Drive just to document processes, and they put them all in documents and and they've got screenshots and just text. But it's beyond that. It's got this benefit of being a checklist where there's accountability and there's a record and there's history of the people actually using the process. And it also is this workflow tool that can be directly integrated with your external tools through Zapier and third-party systems. And it can capture data instead of just be something that somebody refers to and looks at. And so it really does a lot of things. So how would you describe Process Street to those that are just not familiar with it?
Yeah, it's tricky, and we're almost kind of in a new category here. But the easiest way that I explain it to normal people that don't know anything about processes or workflow or software or whatever is that we're superpowered checklists, right? So you have a checklist, like this is something that needs to get done over and over again, and something that we have a checklist that we want to follow. So in property management, good ones would be like, we have a checklist for every time a tenant moves in or a tenant moves out, or we have a checklist every time we sign up a new landlord. Right. And in that checklist, it's essentially just like, these are all the things that we have to do. And we want to make sure that we remember to do, or that someone on our team remembers to do every time a tenant moves in or a tenant moves out. So that could be like, make sure that you do a background check and make sure you get the contract signed and make sure that they get the keys and make sure that you've inspected the property and this and that, right? And so it sounds simple, right? And it's a simple way of explaining it. But then once you kind of have that checklist, and you can build a checklist really, really fast, as fast as you can, just typing out a list of stuff in Excel or a doc or whatever. But then once you got that checklist, you can superpower it. So this is like where the superpowers come in. So you can have each of those steps and you can say, make sure that, the tenant gets their keys. And then inside that, you can have instructions. So you can have, this is where the keys are located. The keys are numbered this way. Once that you've given them the key, go into here and fill out this form and make sure that you've got the tenant to sign in this book that they've received the keys with a photo of the book or something, right? So now I can against each of those tasks, I can add instructions on how to do the tasks. As you mentioned before, you can add in form fields to actually collect data along the way. So if you have a step that's like collect the tenant's information, you could type it, you could have fields that's like what's the tenant's name and what's their address or what's the address of the house and things like that. And you can kind of catalog all that information. And that kind of turns into similar to submitting a form or filling out a spreadsheet or something where you kind of get all that data in like a tabular form. And you can use that in the future for automations, as we'll talk about. So then you can kind of control rules around the tasks. So now I have like a checklist. Inside each task, I have different steps. I can say, I can have content or I can have form fields inside those steps, but now I can start to create rules around the tasks. So I can say like, if it's an apartment building, add this task for like have a building key. But if it's a house, hide that task for give building key, right? So I can kind of customize this checklist based on variables or conditions that are happening in the scenario. So for example, is it a house or is it an apartment, or is it in suburb A or is it in suburb B? And then maybe there's a different agent or a different like something else that kind of like has to happen based on that scenario. I can add kind of handoffs. So I can say, wait until John collects the keys and then assign Brandy to go and call the landlord or return the keys or something like that. So I can hand off steps. I can say when somebody needs to do something, kind of hand off, or I can create kind of automations in due dates. So I can say this task is due 2 days after the keys are given, or this task is due 3 days before the staging date, or this task is due 2 days after the staging date. So I can start to create all these like automations and controls around like how the tasks work, when they're ordered, automating when they become due related to other various events, handing off between different people on the team, doing stuff like that. And then I can kind of create lots of automations in other systems from that data as well. So for example, if somebody sent you an email that's like, oh, I'm interested in your property, you could have that kind of trigger and automatically run your checklist. So now I can kind of, every time I add a tag on this email, it runs the checklist automatically and it copies all the details of the email into this checklist so that when I'm running through it, I have it all there. Or if I change something in my CRM or in my rent management system, if like a lease expiry comes up in Rent Manager, you can use that to trigger and automatically launch a checklist. You can then have data from your checklist push into other systems. So if I know, for example, the tenant's name, I've collected their name and their email and the house address, I can take that data and I can put it into HelloSign and I can generate a contract that automatically gets sent out for a signature to that client. Once the signature is signed, you can come back and notify Process Street. This is actually a new feature in Zapier we're about to release, which is find and update checklist. But now you'll be able to like wait for that like signature to come back and then pull back in the signed document, save it to the checklist, check off that that task was signed by the tenant and hand it off to somebody else in the team to kind of do the next task. So you can start to do all sorts of fancy integrations with other systems once you got all that set up.
Okay, so I want to paint a picture for those listening. So I use Process Street in my own business, and I started using it because I'd seen a lot of property managers using it. A lot of property managers said, "Hey, this is really intuitive. It's very easy to use." They started using it. What really pushed me over the edge is we use Basecamp internally as a communication system and platform, which it's great at, but it really isn't good for repetitive processes. And so we had our process documentation scattered throughout several different Basecamp projects for different teams, in-text documents. We had some on Google Drive, and it just got really crazy. There wasn't a central repository to go to. So just changing that alone was a game changer for us. Having one place. Oh, did you look in Process Street? It's in there. Like everybody can go to that. Now, what really kind of pushed me over the edge, though, was I had spoken with the gentleman, and I told you before this call, I'd remember his name. His name was Bob Abbott. And Bob is a property manager that he was telling me how he runs his company, and he's got his profit margin to 65% in his business by using Filipino labor and by using Process Street. He's able, and he showed me how he uses it, and we had some really cool conversations, geeking out because we're both kind of nerdy. And but that's almost unheard of in the property management industry to create that sort of margin, but it's very possible to do in property management because there's a lot of systemizable things. There's a lot of repetitive things, and there's a lot of things where you need somebody manually to do stuff, and you can give them the processes and the checklist to do it. So one of the conversations we had, which I think it's an important balance to strike, is with my team, we want to document processes to the point where a beginner could do it the right way the first time. But we also want to balance that with, we don't want it to slow them down once they know it. Just like driving a car, the very first time somebody drives a car, they're probably checking all their mirrors, adjusting their seat, and doing all this stuff. But after they get used to that, they probably just hop in and drive, right? Yeah. And so so with our team, we try to make sure our process is as few steps as possible, but as many as necessary to create that balance, so that it doesn't get in the way when our experienced team members are trying to use it, but to show record that they've done this task and for this particular client or this particular case or situation. So, but what I've really noticed is brilliant is that just by having a process that's actually used to do the process, and your team is required to use the process to show record that they've done it, the process gets better over time. See, what happens, I've noticed in the business, is I would create a process document in the past, give it to a new team member. They would look at it and say, well, this is outdated, because it always ends up being outdated because nobody's using it on a daily basis. So then we have to fix it and adjust it. And then they learn how to use that. And then once they get familiar with it, they never look at it anymore unless they forget something. So what happens over time, the process breaks down. They start doing their own things. They start changing it. They figure out maybe some innovations they think are innovations. Maybe it's worse, maybe it's better, but that isn't captured in the process. And then if they quit or you lose them, our goal is before they quit or leave, we got to get them to update their processes because they weren't using it. So there's this huge advantage I've noticed in just having the team use the actual process software that the process is in and going through it each time. Because if there's a change that needs to be made, we can adjust it. They can adjust it if I give them permission to, and we can improve it over time. And just the clarity in taking all of our processes in to where they're actually usable as a checklist, it's a huge step from having just a process that you think is documented well enough to somebody actually being able to use it. It's a big leap, and that leap has caused us to significantly change all of the processes that we've brought over into it so far.
That's awesome. Yeah, what we find is that as you kind of continue to iterate your processes over time, that's really when they become more valuable, And I think that's normal for most systems, right? I think once you find if you go look at the enterprise companies, their processes are some of their most valuable kind of pieces of IP because they've been so refined over so many thousands of customers or years or whatever, that they're now really, really valuable, and they're kind of like protected secrets for that organization. And so, yeah, some cool things you can do, for example, so if you have 10 checklists running and you're onboarding 10 different landlords, or you're moving in 10 different tenants, and you do want to make a change. So one of your PMs comes back and says, oh, hey, I noticed that this is incorrect, or this would be more clear if we did it this way. You can update the process, and you can live push out that update to all the 10 checklists. So if you have 10 people in the field at the moment, you can kind of even without them really knowing, they could be in their car, and by the time they get out of their car at the house and they open the process, it's got a new step in there, or the steps changed a little bit, and they'll just follow like that adjusted step. So don't need to run a training program, don't need to like send out an email. It's just kind of like, oh, the process is updated, let's do it. And then on the back end, it's actually not exposed right now, but on the back end, we're actually tracking all of these changes for you. So every time you're making a change to one of your processes, we're capturing those changes in the back end as versions, and we're working on kind of dashboards that will let you see how the output of your process changes over time as you iterate it. So it's like, oh, it was taking us 2 weeks to onboard a landlord when we did version 1 of this, and now it's at version 100, and it's only taking us 4 days or something. And so you can kind of see that as you continue to iterate your process over time, how they're improving or how they're affecting other metrics. So that's pretty cool as well. But
nice.
One of the things that we're really excited about, and where we're kind of is a big part of the vision of the platform, is around kind of what you said before, where there are some processes where maybe you don't want to add extra work to somebody, to their tasks, right? And we definitely have like a lot of processes like that. A good example is answering support tickets. So we don't want somebody to run a checklist on every single support ticket that they're answering, especially once they're in the role. After a while, they know how it all works. But we do want them to do it for training. So we want them to run that checklist for their first or something, right? As they're going through and getting used to it. It's pretty important for us as well as an organization, because we actually have everybody in the company do support when they come in as a new person. So that's an example where we just want people to run at the beginning. But what we're really moving towards is actually we're trying to make our processes actually reduce the amount of time that it takes to get that process done. So when you're using Process Treat, it's actually less time to get that process done than if you were to not use the Process Treat process. And that's like our ideal kind of scenario. Not only is it faster for it to get done, but things got done more accurately. Things got done in a more high detail way. So a good example is like we have like sales proposal processes. So where we send out a proposal for a price point for like a set of users if we're working on an enterprise deal, right? And so for the rep, basically what they have to do is they have to come into their CRM, click like a link in the CRM, which launches a process. From there, they got to fill in a few pieces of info. And from that, it pulls in a lot of the information automatically from the client. So all the client's details are like filled out automatically. They don't have to do any of that. But they got to put in a few things like how many users do they want, and what's the price that we agreed upon or that we want to kind of put in. And they want like a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal, and so kind of things like that, right? And they basically just punch in a few things into the process really, really quickly. It just takes them like 20 seconds. That then hands off automatically to their manager, who then looks at the proposal and approves it inside Process Treat. Once that's approved, it creates a whole kind of proposal with all these multiple like checkboxes and things that can get signed. That would probably take you like 30 minutes to set up, if you're going to go through and do the whole thing yourself. It goes back and it updates the CRM, so it creates opportunities, it changes the statuses and the confidence, and makes it like proposal sent, and puts in links to the proposal, and kind of updates all this information with like what the proposal is like sent out. And so that whole thing for a rep to do that manually, to go customize the Word doc, load it into the easy tool, map in all the fields, send it out, go to the CRM, update like all these different fields in the CRM, and then like follow up tasks and do all this stuff. That takes them like 30 minutes or an hour or something. And with the Process Treat process, they can do it in less than a minute, right? So we're actually working on trying to build processes that will actually significantly make you faster and more accurate to use the platform than without. And that doesn't, obviously, it can't happen for every kind of process, right? You can't really completely automate like going to a house and inspecting it or something like that. There's a pretty manual like aspect to that. But for the ones that we can that are very digital, we are trying to kind of automate as much of them as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with salespeople are notoriously known for not leaving good notes, not wanting to deal with software too much. So any burden you can take off their plate software-wise is a big win, and you're saving that money every single time.
Yeah, for you though, as a business owner, right, or as the team leader of sales, there's way more benefit than that, though, right? Because if you can shave off these like minutes or hours off each of your reps like week, it's not just a pure time saving thing.
Oh
It's
yeah,
like
profitability.
they bill more, right? So like they're able to actually close more deals in that period of time, creates more
Mhm.
momentum for the whole team because the whole team bills more. So the whole team's saving time and building more, which kind of creates this whole, forcing momentum of like, then you're able to hire better reps and you're able to kind of expand to more territories and this and that. Like everything just becomes better. And that's actually a pretty good lesson in most of your teams, right? In that, like, if you can really get the operations piece tight, if you can get your processes tight, so your sales operations or your marketing operations or your support operations, it makes the whole team compounding much more efficient. And it makes your whole organization much more attractive to other people because you wouldn't want to come into like a place, it's a whole giant mess where they're just going to have to be spending all their time copying and pasting stuff and dealing with like rogue spreadsheets. You'll be able to hire much more high quality people and be able to execute a much larger amount of projects and whatnot if just kind of all your infrastructure is solid, right?
Yeah. So you had mentioned that you have everybody when they come in do support. Do you have your developers do support on a regular basis so they have to live inside this tool and deal with the support related things?
Yeah, so we have kind of different support channels. So we have like general support, sales support, and engineering support. So engineering do kind of work on the engineering support. It's generally more like more complicated problems versus kind of, how much does the product cost or things like that. But they're
Oh,
generally
sure.
dealing with the more complicated problems like something with the API or something like that. But yeah, they're in support as well.
Interesting. So property managers that are listening, a lot of times what ends up happening is there's two. I call them the first two sand traps. The first major sand trap a property manager falls into is in the solopreneur stage. They get to maybe 50 or 60 units under management. They're doing it mostly on their own. They're struggling to figure things out. And then the first thing they think of doing is getting people, like hiring people. And people are so expensive. Having a tool like this could immediately allow them to outsource and to offload and create some leverage in their business. Now, where it becomes even more necessary, I think, for a tool like Process Street is when you get into that 200 to 400 door category, which is kind of the next sand trap that they fall into. And this is where they've got a team now. They're struggling to manage this team. They're struggling to keep things organized. They're struggling to maintain some semblance of culture. And their big challenge right now is documentation. It's almost always a big challenge. They need to document their processes. They need to systemize the business. And it's this huge constraint that's limiting their ability to grow and move forward. And by then it becomes, critical for them to get something like this in place where they've got really good processes, really good documentation, and really good clarity as a team as to what's actually being done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 situation because you're kind of like, you've got more work going on when you're, I guess, when you're in that next level of business because you've got more customers and more doors. But and so you kind of feel like you have less time to work on your processes, but your
Yeah.
processes are more important at that point in the company. So it is something that it does at some point. I think deploying a new CRM or whatever is probably a similarly stressful kind of like project to undertake.
Mm-hmm.
But once it's done, you're very happy that you did it, right? And it's kind of
Yeah.
the same thing with processes. You might feel that you're kind of underwater right now, but that's probably a good sign that you need to work on some of your processes, right? If you're that underwater, right? Because you won't be able to scale that way. And then the other thing that
go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing that we have actually that helps a lot with that is we have tons of templates. So we actually create pre-made process templates. We've got a whole bunch in property management. So we've got kind of all sorts of generic ones around. Some of those I mentioned: tenant move in and move out, and tenant screening, and property inspection, and landlord. We also have some ones that are like, oh, this is how you do it if your system is AppFolio or something like that. So it's kind of like more generic ones and ones where you can kind of switch in interacting with your different property management systems. So that actually helps a lot if you do feel like you're really underwater and you don't know where to start with like your documentation and you don't have any time for this. Like, come check out. They're all free, so you can come check out like all the different property management templates that we have, and those are really good starting points.
Yeah, you can also share your process with other people. So you can ask another property manager, hey, what's your process? If they're using Process Street, and they can share that with you, and you can immediately import it into your tool, which is cool. And
Yeah.
And it has a lot of really cool features. If you're on one of the higher plans, you can also do that context sensitive sort of if then statements. So if a certain task is completed a certain way, you can expose or hide certain other steps to make it faster or, you know, more hyper relevant to what needs to be done then. And so you can get as crazy with this as you want, which I think is fascinating, or you can be as simple as just having a few steps with a couple of screenshots and some text. And so immediately, I think anybody could take whatever processes they currently have and just bring it over, copy and paste it in, and then they can start optimizing it. And I've even taken just checklist, just a list in a text document of steps, and you can just paste that in and it spits it out as each separate steps. And so it really is a rapid tool for getting processes built out. And it's been, I think it's been a game changer for those that have implemented, especially those that just didn't have anything. It's a huge leap, huge step up. So, well, Vinay, what's on the horizon for Process Street, and what else do you think those that are managing properties should know about Process Street?
Sure. Well, a couple of things we have coming up is one thing that I know a lot of our property management customers are excited about, and we have hundreds and hundreds, I don't even know how many, a lot of property management companies, all the way from, you know, single person operators up to, we have big teams in like Colliers and Keller Williams and stuff like that. So we do work with a lot of property management companies, and one of the ones that they're really excited about is a feature called role-based assignments. And so right now you can kind of predefine on a checklist who needs to do what. So you can say either, you know, Bob in finance needs to do this kind of collect payment task, or the finance team needs to do this collect payment task. And
nice.
You can say like, you know, the property management agent needs to do these 4 tasks at the beginning. But the way that it works right now is you can only kind of indicate that this person has to do these 4 tasks, right? And it gets a little bit tricky when you have a team of property managers, and like one property comes in, it needs to get assigned to manager A, and then another property comes in, it needs to get assigned to manager B, and another one comes in, it needs to get assigned to property manager C, like that.
Right.
So you want to kind of like rotate the assignments, or you want to kind of map, who's the account manager on this, and make sure that that correct account manager is like assigned to that. So we have now a feature called, it's on beta at the moment, called role assignments. And so at the beginning of the checklist, you can kind of have a drop down that says like, who is the PM that is responsible for this account? And then you kind of can select that, and that will automatically assign like all the property management, like PM related tasks to that particular PM. And so, or you can maybe say like, and then who's their district manager, or who's their regional manager? And that might assign like some of the approval tasks to their particular manager for that PM that you selected, right? So it's a way to kind of like, instead of saying this task is always assigned to Bob, it's like this task is assigned to a property manager. I just don't know exactly which person on the team it's going to be yet. And then I'll assign it out later, or I'll use some type of automation to assign it. So for example, like if I click this on Salesforce, or I click this from one of my property management systems, I could look at like who's the logged in user, or who's the user that's like, that owns this account. And I could automatically push in that email address into the process, and then automatically assign out all those tasks to that particular payment. Oh, actually a really cool one for this is what you can do with it now is you can actually use it to, so there's 2 actually features that just came out. These are really cool PMs. So another feature that's coming out is called task permissions. What task permissions do is it lets you control who can see specific tasks in a checklist. So if I have 10 tasks, I can say that right now, anybody who kind of comes into the checklist can see all the tasks in the checklist. Now I can say, I only want the property manager to see these 5 tasks, and I want the manager to see these 3 tasks, and I want finance to see this 1 task. Oh, what's really cool is you can bring in the actual tenant, or you can bring in the landlord as a guest into the system. So it's like a free user that you can bring in. And you can say, I just want the landlord to see this 1 task at the top, or these 2 tasks. It's like, fill in some form fields here, tell me your property and the address and some information about, you know, when you want someone to come see it. Sign this contract here, and then done. And then those 2 steps are kind of exposed to the landlord, and then your team can come in afterwards and pick it up and continue to now, let's like do a background check on this person, or a credit check or whatever, and like start doing like internal steps. So now you can kind of break up the process and have external people, some internal people, an internal manager, all kind of working on the same process, but not seeing all the information, kind of being siloed into their own tasks and the things that they need to see. So that's pretty cool for bringing in like landlords or tenants. If you need them to upload documents or kind of complete any complicated set of forms, it's really useful. You can like mention them and have conversations with them, and you can like reject their uploads and say, do it again, do it again. Like a lot of this gets done over hundreds of emails back and forth and all these things that get lost. And so it's a really cool way of managing that.
Yeah,
and another big project we're working on is the mobile app. So I think a lot of people will like that too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So I think a lot of the systems that we have that feed into Process Street, we're using some sort of third-party form like Typeform or Gravity Forms, and then we're feeding in that. But you're saying that it'll be possible or even easier to have tenants or clients to submit things through.
Yeah, so you could move that whole form into a task inside the process and just expose one task or two tasks. Cool. To those clients. So you would basically be able to, you wouldn't need to use those external forms anymore, right?
Right. So you want the like client or the tenant to see, call the client up and say these things, because then it seems disingenuous.
Exactly. There's also things like you could be like doing an interview and then you could have like notes on the interview and stuff like that, right? So there's a lot of things where you want that wall of like privacy, right? Where you don't want people to see, or someone could submit like a leave application or an expense approval or something like that, and you want to be able to have a conversation with HR or a conversation with like the manager just about that without the person that submitted it seeing it, right?
Yeah. Well, I think in summary, like if I create a process, if I put a video in there, I have checklist steps, there's so much clarity and transparency for my team to know how to get work done that they don't have to come to me. And any question as an entrepreneur that we get asked once by our team is going to be asked again, unless it's documented somewhere. And so every single one of those interruptions costs you at least 15 minutes of time. And every single one of those interruptions may take, sometimes each time you're training somebody or bringing somebody new, if that's not systemized, it could take you hours. And the only way to really move forward with a business is to create a business that is somehow scalable. And in order to do that, the foundation of that is having some SOPs in place, having some standard operating procedures, having some process documentation. And then I think the brilliance of Process Street is adding that layer of accountability in mixing in a checklist and having people move through a process and being able to see who has done what for that transparency. So, well, cool. Vinay, is there anything else that people listening should know about Process Street before we wrap this up?
Just that it's free to check out. You should go sign up for a free account at www.process.st.
All right, cool. So check out Process Street. It's process.st. And Vinay, thanks for coming on the DoorGrow show. Really great to have you here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great. Thanks for having me.
All right, cool. So for those of you that are listening, I do recommend you check out Process Street. It is a really nice blend between ease and what's easy. I think it's software that once you get into it, it's very intuitive. It's easy for people to figure out. So don't be afraid. But if you are a nerd and you really geek out on tech and automation, I think it has plenty there to satisfy you. And I think they're coming out with some cool new things that will give Podio and other systems a run for their money, so that get a little too complicated for most people. So, all right, so check that out. And then if you are a DoorGrow hacker and you've enjoyed the show, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're watching it in YouTube, make sure on iTunes that you give us a real review. We would appreciate that. And then everybody listening, make sure if you are a property management business owner that wants to grow your business, make sure you get inside our DoorGrow Club by going to doorgrowclub.com and join our free Facebook group. It's an awesome community. And again, thanks to Vinay, and thanks to everybody that's been checking out this show and listening. And until next time, to our mutual growth. Bye, everyone.